James sat on the narrow, stiff cot in his room, pressing his fingertips together. His eyes showed no fear, no despair, just cold, calculated focus. The walls around him were sterile white, just like the people in identical scrubs who came in 3 times a day with his meds. He knew every move they made was part of the game his wife had dragged him into. Victoria had always been smart, cunning, even. But this time, she had outdone herself, locking him away, labeling him insane, a flawless plan. Except for one thing. James had no intention of playing by her rules. He knew exactly what he had to do. They had met in college. She was small, full of life, with a dusting of freckles across her nose. She had a quiet kind of charm, the kind that didn't need loud laughter or attention-seeking antics. She just walked into a room, and people instinctively wanted to be near her. James was no exception. Their first meeting happened in the library. Victoria had been on her tiptoes, stretching to grab a heavy book from the top shelf, when James instinctively reached up and took it down for her. She turned to him with a smile, eyes sparkling. "Thanks, kind sir," she teased. "You just saved me from complete and utter embarrassment." James laughed. From that day on, they were inseparable. Long evenings in the park, endless conversations, coffee under the big oak tree by the dorms. Their first kiss happened there, beneath that same tree. They talked about the future, about a house with a white picket fence, about the sound of their child's laughter filling the backyard. They swore they'd always be together. When he proposed, he did it in a way only Victoria would appreciate. She loved puzzles and treasure hunts, so James created one just for her. He left notes at all their special places, the library where they met, the coffee shop where they had their first date, and finally, under that old oak tree. That's where she found him, standing with a ring in his hand and the words, "Will you be mine forever?" written in chalk on the ground. She cried, nodded, and whispered, "Yes." After the wedding, life went exactly as planned. James and Victoria settled in a quiet little town in Colorado, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the main street glowed with warm lamplight in the evenings, and the scent of fresh-baked bread drifted from the local bakery. James started out small in the real estate business, selling modest homes, nothing over $200,000. He put in the work, driving endless miles between small towns, shaking hands with local homeowners, and building a reputation as a man you could trust. Little by little, he gained experience, learned the ins and outs, and before long, he was closing deals on high-end ranches and luxury estates worth $1 or $2 million. Success didn't come overnight, but 5 years in, when he finally landed his first 6-figure commission, he knew he and Victoria could finally afford the home of their dreams. They spent months searching, but when they found it, they knew. A spacious yet cozy house on the edge of town, sitting on a big stretch of land with rolling hills in the distance, the kind of place where mornings started slow, coffee in hand on the covered porch, watching the sunrise through wide wooden-framed windows. Inside, it had everything they wanted: vaulted ceilings, a stone fireplace in the living room, and a big kitchen with custom wooden cabinets and granite countertops. But James's favorite part was his study, with its rich mahogany bookshelves, plus the oversized garage where his black Cadillac Escalade had its own perfect spot. Victoria turned the house into a home. She had an eye for details: soft blankets draped over chairs, an old antique clock on the shelf, dried flowers in vases. In the fall, carved pumpkins lined the porch steps. In the winter, the fire crackled, filling the house with the scent of burning wood. And in the spring, wildflowers bloomed in the yard, just the way she liked it. Here, life was good, quiet, safe. Every evening, James pulled into the driveway, dust still clinging to his coat from the road. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace and the smell of slow-cooked stew or pumpkin soup greeted him, along with the gentle hum of an old vinyl spinning on the record player. They'd eat dinner together, catching up on the day. He'd talk about clients torn between 2 ranches, And she'd tell him about the fox sneaking into their yard again. Coming home to her, was the one thing that made the long hours worth it. Victoria poured her heart into every inch of that house, but no space received more love than the nursery. A tiny crib, shelves lined with stuffed animals, soft pastel wallpaper, everything waiting for the baby she longed for. She picked out bedtime stories, folded tiny onesies into drawers, holding on to hope. James knew Victoria had never really known stability. Her parents split when she was little. Her mother left her father for another man and took Victoria with her. Then came another marriage and another. With each one, Victoria watched new faces come and go, watched love that seemed so real fade into nothing. She told herself she'd never let that happen to her. When she built a family, it would last. It would be real. But there was a problem. Victoria couldn't carry a child. At first, they didn't think much of it. But after a few failed attempts, she became fixated. She saw doctors, changed her diet, altered her entire routine. Being a mother was all she wanted. 5 years passed in a cycle of hope and heartbreak. James saw it in the way she lingered in the nursery, her fingers trailing over the empty crib, her breath catching as she wiped away silent tears. It tore him apart. He told her they could adopt, or that maybe they could just be happy together, just the two of them. But she only shook her head. He tried to lift her spirits. Once a month, he'd carve out a day off, and they'd ride horses through the national park. Those days felt like the old days. For a little while, it was just them, the wind in their hair, the sky stretching wide. And then the final verdict came. No children, not now, not ever. Victoria didn't cry, she didn't argue, she just stopped talking about it. The nursery became a home library. The baby books disappeared. Instead, she threw herself into fitness, yoga, self-improvement courses. Month by month, James watched her change. She smiled more, laughed more. He was relieved. Maybe they were going to be okay. Maybe their marriage was stronger than this. 15 years passed. James's business took off. He traveled more, homeless. They stopped going to the park. He made up for it with gifts. A hand-woven blanket so she'd stay warm when he was away, a rare Beatles vinyl, an original butcher cover for Yesterday and Today. He tracked down for 15 grand. He could still make her smile. Life wasn't the dream they had planned, but it worked. It was steady. It was enough, or at least it seemed to be. A year ago, James sold the house next door to his friend Ian Holloway, the dean of the local college, and Ian's wife, Marissa. They were the perfect couple to spend time with. No kids, good social standing. The four of them started hanging out often, backyard barbecues, weekend getaways, golf at the private club. James was glad Victoria had picked up a new hobby, playing golf under Ian's guidance. Marissa, on the other hand, ran her own cleaning business and often helped James prep houses for sale. Over time, they became like family. But a month ago, strange things started happening. One evening, James came home after work, same routine as always, parked his Escalade in the driveway, let the music play for a few extra seconds before shutting off the engine, stretched his arms, took a deep breath of crisp air tinged with pine and dry earth, then made his way to the door. Inside, he tossed his keys onto the wooden console table, took off his jacket, and hung it up neatly. And then something felt off. His eyes landed on the living room table. It wasn't in its usual spot. Instead of sitting by the window, it had been moved to the middle of the room. "Victoria," he called, stepping inside. "Why'd you move the table?" Victoria looked up from her laptop, frowning. "What are you talking about?" "The table's always been there." James's brows furrowed. "You sure?" "I remember it being over there by the window." She let out a soft laugh. "Babe, you must be imagining things. It's not a big deal. The table's always been here. Maybe you just never noticed. You've been working too much. You're tired." James hesitated. "Maybe you're right." But the little things kept adding up. His keys weren't where he left them. The kettle turned on by itself. Notes in his journal, handwriting that looked like his, but wasn't, had changed. Victoria grew more concerned. "Honey, did you forget where you put the documents again?" she asked one evening, watching him search the kitchen counter. "I know I left them here," he snapped, running a hand over his face, irritation bubbling up. "You're exhausted," she said gently. "Maybe you should see a doctor, just to be safe." Even Ian had started dropping hints. "You look beat, man," he said. "Maybe you need some rest." One night, they sat together in their cozy living room. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. James noticed Victoria watching him. She seemed hesitant, like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. "Just say it," he told her. She took a slow breath, fingers tracing the spine of the book in her lap. "James." Her voice was soft, tinged with something he couldn't quite place. "You haven't been yourself lately. You forget things. You mix up details. It's not like you." His heartbeat picked up. He had felt it too. Something was wrong. But even the thought of it, the idea that this might be more than stress, was terrifying. "I did some research," Victoria continued, hesitating. "A lot of people online recommend this one doctor. He seems really good. It's not a big deal, just a checkup." James exhaled slowly. "I'll think about it," he muttered, unsure. James and Victoria went to see Dr. Reed together. His office was dimly lit, heavy burgundy curtains blocking most of the daylight. Dark, wood-paneled walls were lined with medical diplomas and certificates. A large oak desk sat in the center, covered in neatly stacked files, while a desk lamp cast a soft yellow glow in the corner. The air was thick with the scent of old books, antiseptic, and faint cigar smoke. James sat in a massive leather chair, feeling the cold press of its upholstery against his back. Across from him, Dr. Reed, a lean man with graying temples, folded his hands and looked at him over the rims of his glasses. His voice was even, almost emotionless. "You experience constant fatigue, irritability, memory lapses?" he asked, watching James closely. "I'm just exhausted. It's normal," James replied tensely. Victoria gave his hand a light squeeze. James felt uneasy under Dr. Reed's sharp gaze and probing questions. The doctor scribbled something in his notes before offering his solution. "I'm prescribing antidepressants," he said, "and I suggest you spend a week at my facility. No phone, no internet, no work obligations." James let out a short laugh. "You're serious? I have clients lined up needing houses sold yesterday." Dr. Reed didn't flinch. "It's this or a stroke in a year. Your choice. Baby, this could be good for you. Just a week." Victoria's voice was gentle, but the concern in her eyes was real. James sighed. "Fine. A week, if that's all." He pushed himself up from the chair, eager to breathe fresh air again. "You go ahead," Victoria said. "I'll catch up." Once James was out of the room, she walked slowly to the desk. She set a thick envelope down on the polished wood surface and leaned in, her voice low but firm. "I hear your facility has a way of keeping people longer than expected. You and I understand each other, Dr. Reed." The doctor barely smiled. His fingers slid over the envelope, then reached for a form. With a stroke of his pen, he signed and stamped it. "He requires immediate hospitalization." He met her eyes. "You came to the right person." With one day left before his stay at the hospital, James decided to have dinner with friends. He didn't cook often, but tonight was an exception. Thick-cut marbled steaks sizzled on the grill, coated in whiskey and spices. He'd prepared roasted potatoes with rosemary and garlic butter to go with them. Victoria had made apple pie, the kind that smelled like home. The house was filled with the smoky aroma of grilled meat, warm spices, and sweet pastry. Candles flickered in the living room, casting a soft glow, while an old country record played in the background. Over dinner, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Colorado's gun laws. "I think it's completely justified in our state. Ian said, leaning back in his chair. We're not New York. We've got wide-open land, wildlife, bears. People have the right to protect themselves. Yeah, but from what? Marissa scoffed. It's not like bears are strolling down our street. I love guns, Victoria said suddenly, swirling her wine. The danger, the adrenaline. James, slicing into a steak, shot her a look. Really? We've been together 20 years, and I've never heard you say that. She grinned. See, I'm still full of surprises. Ian chuckled. Honestly, it's cultural. People here grow up around guns. It's just part of life, like in Texas. It's in their blood. Times change, Marissa shrugged. Some traditions should too. Ian raised his glass. Let's drink to a great dinner, and to James coming back from the hospital better than ever. James lifted his own glass, the room filled with the clink of crystal. Speaking of traditions, he said, setting his drink down, let me show you all the ranch that's been around for 200 years. Give me a second. He got up and headed for his office to grab his laptop. But when he stepped inside, something caught his eye. Victoria's laptop was open on the desk, the screen glowing. Unread messages still popping up in the chat window. He glanced down, and what he saw made his blood run cold. James leaned in closer and read. Ian, I can't take my eyes off you even now. You're incredible. Victoria. Shit, baby. James doesn't suspect a thing. Marissa either. Ian, what you did in the car last time. I can still smell your scent. Victoria. And I can still feel your touch. I can't wait until we're alone again. Something inside James snapped. His world collapsed into darkness. His wife, the woman he trusted, and his best friend, a man he saw as a brother, they were betraying him right here in his house, sitting at his table. He slammed the laptop shut, clenched his fists, and stormed downstairs. His eyes burned with fury. So this is how it really is, he bellowed, throwing his phone at Victoria. Care to explain? Victoria and Ian exchanged a quick glance. Marissa's eyes went wide. What is this, James? Victoria asked, calm, maybe even a little annoyed. This is your baby. Your I can't wait. You're what you did in the car. His voice shook with rage. Victoria let out a sigh. You're imagining things again, darling. Another one of your delusions, huh? Don't you dare lie to me. James lunged at Ian, grabbing him by the collar. Are you out of your mind? Ian shouted, shoving him back. Let go of me. James swung, landing a solid punch across Ian's face. Ian staggered, but stayed on his feet. James, stop. Marissa screamed. You're taking my wife. You took everything from me. James went at Ian again, but Victoria was already dialing. Yes, we need help, she said into the phone, voice urgent. My husband, he's not himself. He's dangerous. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. The orderlies came in and grabbed James by the arms. He fought, struggling against them, his voice raw with desperation. You're insane. They're lying. They're cheating. But no one listened. They led him out of his own house, leaving Victoria, Ian, and Marissa standing there in silence. James woke up to sunlight hitting his face through a barred window. No curtains, no warmth. He had no idea how he got here. And for a moment, he wasn't even sure where here was. A big, sterile room, white walls, a few chairs. His head felt heavy, like he'd been in a long, restless sleep. He tried to stand, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He sank back onto the stiff mattress. A few minutes later, a nurse walked in. Good morning, Mr. Beaumont, she said gently. How are you feeling? Where am I? What's going on? His voice was quiet, hoarse. She gave him a reassuring smile. You're in a hospital, Mr. Beaumont. Well, Greenwood Clinic, specifically for people who need help. We're here to help you recover. James nodded slowly, trying to process her words. The nurse kept smiling. Dr. Reed will be in to see you soon." Then she left. Dr. Reed. He'd said something about a retreat, about rest. But this wasn't that. "Welcome to Greenwood Clinic," a voice muttered from the next bed. James turned his head for the first time and noticed a thin man sitting there, staring at the wall, rocking back and forth. And then it hit him. An asylum. James clenched his fists. This was an asylum. The place reeked of bleach, urine, and something stale, like fear that had settled into the walls over time. The halls were narrow, the paint peeling in spots, cracks crawling across the surface like deep wrinkles on an old man's face. The rooms were bare, the metal frame beds lined up like barracks, thin mattresses covered with sheets so rough they felt like sandpaper. At night, the silence would be shattered by distant groans, the occasional scream, and sometimes an eerie, unnatural stillness that was even worse. James noticed something odd right away. Most of the patients were elderly, mostly women. They were clean, well-kept, their posture and mannerisms showing signs of refinement. They spoke in hushed voices, careful, deliberate. But their eyes carried a quiet sorrow. How did they end up here? James wondered. They don't seem crazy. Were they tricked into this place, just like me? Time inside these walls stretched and warped, dissolving into a slow, endless loop. The only thing anchoring James, keeping his mind sharp, was one thought: revenge. The days blurred together into routine. Early wake-ups, lining up for pills that dulled the mind, softened the edges of reality. At first, James pretended to take them, slipping them under his tongue and flushing them down the toilet later. But someone must have seen. One afternoon, a burly orderly stormed into his room, grabbed him by the collar, and yanked him up. James knew what was coming. He'd already seen what they did to people who broke the rules. Just a few days earlier, he'd caught a glimpse of an old man, one of the loud, defiant ones, being dragged down the hall. They took him into that room, the therapy room. Minutes later, James heard the machine start up, a low mechanical hum. Then the screams. The overhead lights flickered. Eventually, the doors swung open again, and two orderlies wheeled out a stretcher. The man was still, unmoving, his body covered by a white sheet. "Is this how it ends for me?" The orderly shoved James through the door and locked it behind them. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Be careful. Don't get caught." James stiffened. The man's dark eyes met his. No emotion, but something behind them. A warning. "What?" James whispered. The orderly glanced at the door. "I've been watching you. I knew right away you don't belong here. Someone put you here." James's jaw tightened. "My wife," he muttered. The man gave the slightest nod. "This place, it's not what it looks like. Rich families pay off Reed to lock people away. Usually, it's old women. Their kids want them out of the way so they can take the money. But a man like you, that's rare." James's voice echoed in the hall. The orderly's voice dropped even lower. "Just don't let them catch you slipping." And then he was gone, leaving James alone with new dangerous thoughts. A week later, Victoria came to visit. She strolled in like she owned the place, her expression calm, almost smug. "What the hell have you done?" James's voice was barely a whisper, but the fury in it was sharp enough to cut glass. Victoria leaned in closer, her voice soft, almost sweet. "James, it's already done. The court declared you incompetent. By law, I have full guardianship over you now. The lawyers are finalizing everything. The house, the business, the accounts, they're all mine." His hands curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. "You have no right." She tilted her head, pretending to consider his words. "Oh, but I do. Legally, you can't make financial decisions anymore. The court ruled you need protection." She gave a little smile. "And I'm your protector now." James's breath came fast and hard, rage searing through his veins. "You're not even hiding it," he finally said, almost in disbelief. Victoria shrugged. Why would I? No one's going to believe you. You're insane, remember? She let that sink in, letting him really feel it. Then, satisfied, she smoothed down the front of her coat and turned to leave. Oh, and one more thing, she said over her shoulder, fingers gliding along the edge of her purse. Dr. Reed sends his regards. And just like that, she was gone, leaving James in the cold, sterile silence. But she'd made a mistake. She thought she'd won. She thought he was beaten. She was wrong. He was going to get out of here. And when he did, he was going to destroy her. The days blurred together. Pills, cold walls, surveillance cameras. Holding on to his sanity was getting harder. They moved 2 more patients into James's room. One was always singing strange little songs he made up on the spot, and the other barely spoke at all. His gaze was always far away, as if he was trying to remember something lost, or maybe something that had never been real in the first place. The only thing James ever heard him say, "I'm not supposed to be here," at 11 a.m. sharp, every single day. Then, at the same time every day, orderlies came to escort them for water treatments. That's what they called it. A nice, clean name for something brutal. They were stripped down and herded into a sterile, white-tiled room. The air was damp, reeking of bleach. A heavy-duty hose roared to life, sending ice-cold water blasting against their bare skin. People screamed, shivering, curling in on themselves for warmth. Then came the shaving. It wasn't about hygiene. It was punishment. The first few got the sharpest razors. By the time they got to the last ones in line, the blades were dull, dragging over skin, scraping, leaving red welts. But none of that compared to what James felt inside. The physical pain was nothing compared to the fire of betrayal burning in his chest. Back in the room, James sat on the edge of his cot, still wet, muscles aching. And then he noticed something was off, something wrong. The man who had whispered, "I'm not supposed to be here," just a few nights ago was standing at the far end of the room, silent, unmoving. Then, without warning, he pulled a razor from his sleeve and dragged it across his throat. Red spilled over his hands, dark and thick. James froze. It was so fast, so quiet. Life just leaked out. His brain refused to process it. His chest tightened, his pulse pounded in his ears, each beat like a hammer against a coffin lid. The door burst open. Orderlies and nurses flooded in, but it was too late. The body that had been a man just minutes ago was now nothing but a pile of cooling flesh. They wheeled him away, wrapped in a sheet. That night was the worst yet. James lay on the thin mattress, every bone aching from the hard frame underneath. He couldn't sleep. Down the hall, an old television flickered, casting a dim glow across the floor. A night nurse sat in the corner, watching Oprah. On screen, a woman was crying, telling her story. Her husband had left her, taken the kids, stolen everything. Now he was living it up with someone new. Oprah leaned in, her voice full of understanding. "You have to let it go. You will never find peace if you live in the past." James's eyes followed a fly buzzing against the window, tapping the glass over and over, searching for an escape that wasn't there. He smacked it dead with his palm. James' only hope was Vega, the orderly who should have turned him in but didn't. Vega was about 40, built solid, with dark hair and sharp, knowing eyes. He wasn't a talker, but James had caught him watching, not the way the others did. He didn't see a patient. He saw a man who didn't belong there. And that meant hope. One morning in the cafeteria, Vega slid into the seat across from him. "Your wife was here yesterday," he said in a low, steady voice. James tensed, his fingers curling around the plastic fork in his hand. "I saw her leaving Reed's office," Vega continued, glancing around before lowering his voice further, "with some tall guy who smelled like he bathed in cologne." James's stomach twisted. "Ian." Vega nodded, reading his expression. "I followed them out, heard them talking about you." James clenched his jaw. They're not gonna let me out, are they? Vega went on. I saw them, kissing, laughing about you. James didn't flinch, didn't rage. The fire inside him had burned past anger. It had turned to ice. Get out, destroy them. Get out, destroy them. Vega leaned in, his voice thick with something bitter. I've been where you are, he muttered. Had a wife once. She did me dirty, took everything. James's pulse thrummed against his skin. Vega looked him dead in the eyes. Some women need to learn their place. James barely moved, just the slightest nod. Vega sat back, tone dropping to a whisper. Make her pay for all of us. The next 3 days were hell. Every move James made had to be perfect. No mistakes. He had to play the part. Act like the obedient patient while Vega worked out the plan. Then, finally, the night came. The clinic was drowned in its usual eerie silence, broken only by the occasional footsteps echoing through the halls, or the distant mumbling of patients lost in their own worlds. Vega walked into the room, his face unreadable. Time to go, he muttered. James's pulse kicked up. He swallowed the dry lump in his throat and followed. They moved quickly but carefully, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the harsh glow of the hallway lights. The plan was simple. Slip through the service corridors, dodge security, and get out through the back exit. But things never go as planned. A piercing scream tore through the air. One of the patients, a man with wild, unblinking eyes, began pounding on the walls, shouting nonsense. A light flickered, and then, thudding footsteps. Heavy ones. The guards were coming. Vega spun toward James. Run. Then he bolted in the opposite direction, drawing attention away. James took off, lungs burning as he sprinted down the corridor. Voices behind him. Shouts. Whistles. Then the blaring wail of sirens. The lockdown system kicked in. Steel doors hissed and groaned as they started sealing shut. He ran faster. One last door ahead, already halfway down. He threw himself forward, diving under it just as it slammed behind him. Cold metal scraped his back. He hit the ground hard, knees slamming into concrete, but there was no time for pain. He was in a maintenance tunnel, narrow, dimly lit, walls reeking of bleach and rusted pipes. Water dripped somewhere close. The air was damp, heavy. He kept moving. Then, an exit, the last door. Beyond it, freedom. But standing between him and the outside world was a guard. James's eyes flicked around, searching. His gaze landed on a metal tray filled with medical tools. No time to hesitate. He grabbed it and hurled it at the guard, catching him in the shoulder. The man flinched just enough. James charged, shoved past him, and burst through the door. Cool night air hit him like a slap. The distant wail of sirens faded behind him as he sprinted into the dark. He was free. James ran through the wilderness, his breath ragged, his body aching. The underbrush tore at his legs, damp with morning dew. His arms were scratched, his clothes tattered. He didn't know how long he'd been running, how far he'd gone. He only knew he couldn't stop. They'd be looking for him. Colorado was big, but not big enough when people were hunting you. For 2 days, he wandered through the forest, drinking from streams, eating wild berries. His body screamed for rest, but something inside him burned hotter than exhaustion, revenge. When he finally stumbled onto a gas station at the edge of some nowhere highway, he knew he had one shot. He needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. There was only one man he could call. Peter, an old friend, a cabbie, a guy who'd seen things, done things, and never asked why. James stood back in the shadows of the streetlight, waiting. 10 minutes later, a beat-up sedan rolled up to the curb. The window slid down, and Peter gave him a long look. "Jesus," he muttered, "you look like you crawled out of a grave." James pulled the door open and slid in. "Feels about the same." Peter reached into the back seat, pulled out a bundle of clothes, and tossed it over. "Ain't no Armani, but it'll do." James took the old sweater and jeans, nodding his thanks. The warmth of the car wrapped around him. Coffee, cigarettes, the smell of the road. He leaned back, head against the seat, and for the first time in 2 days, he let his eyes close. They pulled onto the highway. "You need cash?" Peter asked. James nodded. James stepped out of the car, standing for a moment under the flickering neon glow of the vacancy sign. The buzzing light cast a sickly green hue over the rundown roadside motel. The parking lot was cracked, littered with old receipts and cigarette butts. The faded curtains in the windows barely hung on, some drawn tight, others left open just enough to show glimpses of tired, dimly lit rooms. A perfect place to disappear. At the front desk, no one asked questions. He slid over cash, took the key, and walked down a musty, dimly lit hallway. The floor creaked beneath his boots. His door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, the room smelled of mildew and cheap disinfectant. The bed was narrow, the mattress lumpy and caved in from years of neglect. The comforter looked like it hadn't seen a washing machine in months. Water stains stretched across the walls, and a crumpled fast food bag lay abandoned on the floor. The mirror in the tiny bathroom was streaked with grime. James didn't care. He locked the door behind him, kicked off his boots, and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress was softer than he expected, the first soft bed he'd laid on in months. His eyes shut, and just like that, he was out. No dreams, no nightmares, just darkness. James couldn't go home. That life was gone. His house, his business, his name, everything belonged to Victoria now. Instead, he hitchhiked to Fairview. There, at Riverbend Lake, his family had once owned a hunting cabin, a forgotten place tucked deep in the trees, where the walls were cracked from age, and tomorrow, 10 p.m., the dock. Come alone. The next night, Marissa arrived at the meeting spot. She stood near the pier, arms crossed, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. She kept glancing around, tense, on edge. James emerged from the shadows. "Jesus, James." She sucked in a breath. "You look." He smirked bitterly, like a man who just broke out of an asylum. Marissa exhaled sharply, folding her arms tighter. "You shouldn't have come back. It's dangerous." "For who?" James took a step closer. "For me. Or for your husband and his mistress." She swallowed hard, looking away. "You knew," James murmured. "You always knew." Marissa flinched, then nodded. "Yes." Her voice was quiet. "But you don't understand. I had my own secrets. My marriage with Ian isn't what it seems. We haven't been a real couple in years. We both had our distractions." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "With Victoria, it's different. She wants him. If that happens, I lose everything." She hesitated. "I saw what her lawyers did to you." James stepped even closer, close enough to reach her. He touched her hand. "Then help me," he said softly. "Together, we can destroy them." Marissa hesitated. Fear, pain, and curiosity flickered across her face. She opened her mouth, then stopped, her fingers tightening around her phone. "James, I can't." Her voice trembled. "This is wrong." She scrolled to Ian's name, her thumb hovering over call. She didn't press it. The silence stretched. James didn't push. He just watched, waiting. Then slowly, Marissa exhaled. She closed her eyes, dropped her phone. "Damn it," she whispered. Then she looked up at him. "I'm in." James smiled. He had a partner. James stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching as dark clouds rolled low over the mountains. The cold wind cut through his skin, but he barely noticed. His mind was restless, thoughts churning like a storm. He couldn't trust anyone, except Marissa. She arrived that evening, just as the rain came pouring down. She climbed out of her car, clutching an old blanket, and draped it over his shoulders. "You can't live like a wild animal," she said softly. "You have to think straight." "This is all I have left," James muttered, staring at the fire flickering inside. On the table sat a homemade meat pie, fresh bread, and a thermos of steaming coffee. The smell hit him hard. It smelled like the past, like a life that was gone. And that hurt more than he expected. He ate slowly, cautiously, as if expecting it to be some kind of trick. Marissa sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. After a moment, she reached over, resting her hand on top of his. Their eyes met. "We can do this," she whispered. "Together." James didn't answer. Instead, he just squeezed her fingers gently. It was the first sign of trust, maybe something more, but neither of them was ready for that. The betrayal still felt too fresh, too raw. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the fire crackled, casting restless shadows on the walls. And in that lonely cabin, far from everything they once knew, they found themselves as the only two people in the world they could count on. 2 days later, James almost ran straight into Victoria. It happened at a grocery store on the edge of town. He was standing in line, a few supplies in his hands, water, canned food, batteries, when he heard her voice. His whole body tensed. Slowly he turned. There she was, Victoria, standing by the wine aisle, scanning the bottles with a casual ease. She wore a light-colored dress, her hair swept up in an elegant style. She looked calm, carefree, like nothing had ever happened. James's pulse pounded in his ears. Rage flared in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe. She couldn't see him. He paid quickly, keeping his head low, then walked toward the exit, careful not to look her way. But as he climbed into his truck, something in the rearview mirror made his stomach drop. Victoria had stepped outside too. She stood near the entrance, scanning the parking lot. Did she sense him? James didn't wait to find out. He started the engine and pulled away, disappearing around the bend. But the encounter left him shaken. This wasn't over. It only confirmed what he already knew. He had to move fast. It was time. The lake house was swallowed in darkness. The wind rustled through the treetops, and the waves lapped softly against the wooden dock. Inside, the fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The scent of burning wood mixed with the smoky bite of whiskey. Marissa sat in an old armchair, her lips resting against the rim of a cold glass. She lazily swirled an ice cube, staring at the flames. But her thoughts were far from the warmth of the room. James stood across from her, one hand resting on the back of the couch. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, sharp, focused. "It's time," he said finally. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath, a quiet force. "Are you sure you're ready? Once we start, there's no going back." Marissa lifted her gaze, her lips parted like she was about to say something. But instead, she took another sip of whiskey. The ice burned against her tongue, the alcohol heating her from the inside. "Can I trust you?" she asked quietly. James didn't hesitate. "Always." Marissa let out a short laugh, but there was no joy in it, only bitterness. "Hard to trust men after years of being lied to," she murmured. Her voice wavered for just a second before she caught herself. "The open marriage idea. That was Ian's. I only agreed because I thought if I played along, he'd see me differently, like I was special." She shook her head, stirring the ice in her glass again. "Truth is, I never had a lover. I just let him think I did, made me feel, I don't know, more interesting." She exhaled a heavy breath. "Stupid." James's jaw tensed. He looked away for a moment, his fingers curling into a loose fist before relaxing again. "I have a plan," he said at last, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "But I need your connections with the press." Marissa set her glass down on the table and leaned back in the chair. Her fingers traced the edge of the armrest almost absently. Then she sighed and picked up her drink again, taking a deep swallow. She locked eyes with James. "I'm listening." A few days later, Marissa sat in her living room, staring at the phone on the table in front of her. Ian was supposed to be home an hour ago. He hadn't answered her messages. The wine in her glass was nearly gone. The ice had long since melted. Finally, her phone rang. She snatched it up immediately. "Where are you?" she asked, skipping the formalities. "Got caught up at work," Ian said casually. He sounded completely at ease, then decided to unwind for a bit. "Golf club, you know how it is." In the background, she heard muffled voices, then laughter, a woman's laughter. "Victoria says hi," Ian added, and she could hear the smirk in his voice. Her grip tightened around her glass, knuckles going white. "I see," she said evenly. "Relax, babe. We're just playing golf." Marissa's face burned, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew he was lying, but hearing Victoria's laugh in the background, hearing how easy it was for them to mock her right in the open, that was different. That was enough. She felt her breathing slow, her thoughts sharpen, her hand no longer trembling. "Fine, Ian. Enjoy your game." She ended the call and sat motionless for a long moment. Then, without hesitation, she grabbed the nearly empty wine bottle, dumped the rest down the sink, and tossed it in the trash. That was the last humiliation she would ever take. The next morning, right at 8, Marissa was already at James's cabin by the lake. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. The lake stretched out before them, still as glass, with only the occasional ripple from the wind. James sat on the old wooden dock, his hands resting behind him as he stared into the dark water. His face was covered in rough stubble, his eyes hollow, yet deep inside them, a fire still burned. He could hear Marissa pacing behind him, her fingers tightening around her phone. She hadn't slept much. Thoughts swarmed in her head all night, offering no relief. She had reached out to an old contact, Oscar Bennett, a sharp-tongued journalist with no mercy for corruption. He was the kind of man who could drag Ian and Victoria into the daylight. Now she was just waiting for his call. The silence around them was thick, suffocating. She could hear her own breath. So could James. He didn't say a word, but he could feel the tension in her movements, the hesitation, the anger. Finally, the phone vibrated in her hand. She exhaled sharply, as if preparing to step off a cliff. Then she answered. "Is it ready?" Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "The evidence is airtight," Bennett replied. "By tomorrow morning, it'll be front-page news." Marissa closed her eyes for a moment. Just yesterday, she had been terrified of exposing Ian and Victoria. Now, she and James were standing at the edge of the abyss, ready to push them over. The next day, the town exploded. The fake madmen. How a wife and a best friend threw a businessman into an asylum for money and power. The headlines screamed from every newspaper stand. The article laid it all out: Victoria and Ian's conspiracy, the bribed doctor, the forged medical records, the fraudulent transfer of James's assets. And there it was, right under the headline, a picture of Ian standing next to Victoria, both smiling. Only now, it looked like a death sentence. Victoria's phone wouldn't stop ringing, calls from reporters, attorneys, acquaintances. She paced the room like a caged animal. "This is a disaster, Ian. We have to do something." Her voice shook with fury. "Calm down. I'll talk to the lawyers," Ian stammered, rubbing his face. There has to be a way out. But there wasn't. The story spread like wildfire. Ian, who just yesterday walked the halls of the university, shaking hands with professors and students, was now a pariah. Every major paper, every news site, even the local gossip blogs, they all had the same story. Fraud, bribery, betrayal. The university's board called an emergency meeting. They didn't even ask Ian to explain himself. The decision was swift: termination. The official statement cited behavior unbecoming of an academic leader and in direct conflict with the values of the institution. Ian tried to fight it. His attorneys filed appeals, sent letters, begged for a private settlement. But no one wanted anything to do with him anymore. Every door slammed shut. A week later, Ian left town, just disappeared. For a while, his name still came up in quiet conversations, But eventually, he became nothing more than a cautionary tale, something people whispered about over coffee. Did you hear what happened to Ian? Yeah, that's how it ends. As for Marissa, she took him for half of everything he had. And when the papers were signed, her heart was finally at peace. She had made the right choice. The court overturned James's case. The new evidence, the relentless journalism, and the public outrage had done their job. After a few weeks, he was fully exonerated, his rights reinstated. The ruling was clear. Everything would be returned to him. The house, the bank accounts, the business. And Victoria, she lost it all. The money, the properties, the reputation, everything she had clung to, everything she had built her life around, was now gone. When the judge read the final verdict, she turned, locking eyes with James. His face was calm, not triumphant, not angry, just cold, indifferent. Victoria was waiting for him in the courthouse hallway. When he stepped out of the courtroom, she moved toward him. James, her voice was hoarse, but she held herself together. Can we talk? He stopped, eyes blank as he looked at her. About what? His voice was steady, emotionless. You know this isn't how it was supposed to end, she said, her breath shallow. Things got out of control. I just wanted my house, my life. He tilted his head slightly, as if genuinely curious. Yeah, I noticed. Victoria clenched her teeth, hands trembling. I made a mistake. I was cornered. You didn't leave me a choice. James studied her with mild interest. And what was I supposed to do? Just hand everything over and disappear, accept your betrayal, let you bury me in that clinic. His voice was calm, but every word was sharp as glass. Victoria said nothing. You thought I wouldn't make it out. James let out a quiet, bitter chuckle. That no one would believe me. That was your mistake, Victoria. You underestimated me. Her lips trembled, but no words came. James turned and walked away without looking back. Victoria stood frozen in the empty hallway, her fists clenched. She had lost, and she didn't even realize yet. It wasn't over. James had no intention of just going back to his old life. Standing on the shore of the lake near his hunting cabin, he held a photograph of Victoria in his hands. His gaze was cold, steel, unforgiving. This isn't over, he murmured. The wind carried his words into the dark. The final blow. James had spent weeks preparing for the last stage of his plan. He chose a method that would break Victoria slowly, piece by piece. No direct confrontation, no obvious moves. Just a subtle, creeping manipulation that would make her doubt herself, her choices, her reality. The same way she had done it to him. But James had to be smarter than she was, more invisible. He watched her from a distance. Victoria had stayed in town, though her life looked nothing like before. She rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts. 1 bedroom, worn-out furniture, cheap curtains that barely covered the windows. Before, thanks to James, she'd never worked a day in her life. Now, she had no choice. She took a job at a small cafe, the only place that would hire her. When familiar customers walked in and recognized her, she saw it in their eyes. Pity, quiet disgust, or outright contempt. Victoria had become a cautionary tale, a name people whispered about, but never too loudly. James started with anonymous phone calls, just silence, breathing on the other end. Every time her phone rang, Victoria's heart slammed against her ribs. Was it real? Was someone watching? Or was it just her own paranoia eating her alive? Then came the emails from an unknown sender, and they terrified her. Victoria, you have no idea how much I know about you. When you walked past me today, I caught the scent of your body wash. Fresh, citrusy, like lemon tart, almost good enough to eat. She stopped going out after dark, locked and double-checked her windows. The messages kept coming every night. Victoria, you know I'm always there, even when you don't see me. Soon, I'll be part of your life. Tomorrow morning, I'll leave you a little gift outside your door. The next morning, She stood frozen at her apartment door, before finally gathering the courage to open it. Nothing. No package, no note, nothing tangible at all. But it didn't matter. The fear was real. Victoria barely slept. She was alone, too ashamed to tell anyone what was happening. After the scandal with Ian, everyone had turned their backs on her. No friends, no allies, no one to confide in. James knew exactly what she was feeling. Fear, doubt, the slow unraveling of control. Victoria became paranoid, jumpy, suspicious of every shadow. Until she finally snapped. She walked into the police station, frazzled and pale, dark circles under her eyes telling a story of sleepless nights. Her clothes, a plain jacket, faded jeans, made her look like a shadow of the woman she used to be. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if her stalker was right there, breathing down her neck. A young officer looked up from his computer. "How can I help you?" I need to file a report," she stammered. Her voice was shaky. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady herself. "Someone is following me." The officer gave her a quick once-over, then nodded toward a chair. "All right, ma'am. Have a seat. Tell me everything." Victoria's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, opening her email and shoving it toward the officer. "These messages," she said, her voice cracking, raw with exhaustion. "They keep coming. I don't know who it is. He knows where I live, what I do, what I wear." Her breath hitched. "I'm scared to leave my apartment." The officer took the phone, scrolling through the messages, his expression unreadable. "Have you seen anyone suspicious hanging around your building?" he asked. Victoria shook her head, gripping the edges of her coat like it was the only thing holding her together. "No, but I feel it every time I step outside." The officer sighed, flipping through a few more messages. "We can file a report," he said, voice flat, practiced. "But unless there's an immediate threat, there's not much we can do." Victoria clenched her hands into fists on her lap. "So you're just going to do nothing?" Her voice shot up, frustration pushing past her fear. The officer finally looked at her, gaze steady but distant. "We'll see if we can trace the sender," he continued. "In the meantime, just be careful." "Be careful?" Victoria grit her teeth as she stood up. "By the way," the officer added, flipping a pen between his fingers, "you are Victoria Beaumont, right?" She stiffened at the sound of her last name, then turned back. The officer smirked. "Some people just get what they deserve." A chill ran down her spine. When Victoria left the station, the fear didn't fade. If anything, it tightened its grip on her. Because out there in the dark, someone was still watching. The police took her case seriously at first. They ran an analysis on the threatening emails, tracked the calls made to her apartment, and what they found. Victoria had been sending the messages to herself. The threatening calls, made from her own phone, like she'd staged the whole thing. Sitting across from the precinct captain, Victoria pressed her knees together, hands gripping the chair. The captain skimmed through a file before finally looking up. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said, measured, almost bored. "You do realize filing a false police report is a crime?" Victoria flinched. "What?" Her voice came out small, lost. The captain slid a report toward her. "According to our tech department, the emails came from your own device. The calls from your cell phone. You sent those messages to yourself." Victoria's breath caught. Her vision blurred. "No, that's not possible." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That has to be a mistake. I wouldn't." She swallowed hard. "Why would I do that?" The captain raised an eyebrow. "That's a good question." He leaned back in his chair, watching her reaction. "We could fine you for wasting police time," he continued. "But if this happens again, you might be facing more serious charges." "No." Victoria shook her head, her voice unsteady. "You don't understand. It wasn't me." The officer across from her barely blinked. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said, his tone almost sympathetic now, like he was speaking to a fragile child. "Maybe you should talk to someone. a specialist. There are good doctors who help in these situations. Victoria shot up from her chair. Are you saying I'm crazy? Her voice cracked, disbelief washing over her. That I just made this up. The captain gave a half-hearted shrug. We go where the facts lead us, Mom, he said, like it was nothing. And the facts speak for themselves. Victoria spun on her heel, furious. But as she turned, her bag caught the edge of the desk, tumbling to the floor, spilling its contents. A small orange pill bottle rolled across the floor. The captain bent down, picked it up. Her name was on the label. These aren't mine, Victoria whispered, her face draining of color. I don't know how they got in there. The officer narrowed his eyes. Well, they've got your name on them. He set the bottle on the desk with a dull thud. Looks like you could use some help after all. Victoria's pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't happening. She turned, making a break for the door. She barely made it 2 steps before hands grabbed her. Rough, unyielding. She struggled. Then the room tilted. Her head slammed against the cold tile floor. And then, nothing. When Victoria came to, she was in a cold, sterile room, surrounded by walls the color of dirty linen. Light seeped in through a barred window. Heavy iron doors shut her off from the world she once knew. On the other side of those doors, James stood still, feeling his chest tighten. He had waited a long time for this moment, and now that it was here, so close he could almost taste it, his heart pounded harder than usual, excitement mixed with relief. This was it. He took a deep breath before stepping inside. Victoria sat on the narrow hospital bed. You, she whispered, eyes wide with shock. James walked toward her, slow and deliberate, wearing the same cold smile she'd had the day they dragged him away. You taught me how this game works, he said, voice soft but cutting. Victoria flinched, pressing herself against the wall, a ghost of who she used to be. You mean to tell me this was you? James held her gaze, steady and unflinching. Now's the time for the truth. Yes, I hired someone to reroute the emails and calls, had them track your phone, frame you the way you framed me. Victoria's lips trembled. The pills, she choked out, still struggling to believe it. James shrugged. Slipping them into your bag at the store wasn't hard. Victoria's breath quickened, her hands balled into fists. I'll tell the police, she shrieked. I'll sue you for this. James tilted his head slightly. No one will believe you. His voice was almost amused. In case you forgot, you're the crazy one now. Victoria let out a shaky breath, her whole body trembling. You're insane, she whispered. James took a step back, his expression unreadable. No, Victoria. His voice was calm, even. I just made sure you felt what I felt every single day. He turned to leave, but Victoria lunged. With a scream, she clawed at his back, throwing wild punches, trying to bite, to scratch, to hurt. Chaos erupted. Orderlies burst into the room, wrestling her down. She thrashed, kicked, screamed. A needle plunged into her arm. Within seconds, her body slackened, rage dulling into sluggish murmurs. James straightened his jacket, smoothing the wrinkles. He looked down at her, motionless on the bed. Goodbye, Victoria. He walked out without looking back. Outside the hospital doors, Marissa was waiting. She extended her hand without a word. James took it. Their eyes met. No need for explanations. This was a new beginning.